A uniform does not make you family, Claire. If anything, yours is the reason you stopped belonging here. Vanessa Whitmore said it across the dinner table with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed the thought long before finding the courage to speak it aloud. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked 7:15. Rain traced thin silver lines down the tall windows of Richard Donovan's Virginia home, and the soft clink of a serving spoon against porcelain suddenly sounded much louder than it should have. Major Claire Donovan did not answer. At 36, she had spent 14 years in the United States Army and enough time in tense rooms to know that silence could reveal more than argument ever would. She sat beneath the warm chandelier in her service uniform, light brown hair neatly secured, gray-blue eyes resting on the woman across from her. Her ribbon rack caught a narrow line of light. Vanessa noticed it and looked away as though even that small reflection annoyed her. Richard lowered his fork. "Vanessa, that is enough." "Is it?" Vanessa asked. "She arrives at a family dinner dressed for duty, Richard." Again. Claire glanced at the rain-darkened window. She had driven nearly 40 miles from Fort Belvoir after an afternoon meeting ran late. Her father had asked her not to miss dinner. Vanessa had insisted they would sit down precisely at 7. Changing clothes would have meant arriving late, so Claire had chosen the promise she could keep. "I told Dad why I was wearing it," Claire said. Her voice was quiet. Vanessa gave a thin smile. "There is always a reason. There is always an assignment, a briefing, a ceremony, something more important." Richard shifted in his chair. "She came, Vanessa." "Yes, she came." Vanessa looked directly at Claire. "But she never really comes home." The words landed harder than the first ones. Claire felt it, though nothing in her expression betrayed the impact. Across the table, her 24-year-old cousin Emily stopped reaching for the bread basket. She looked from Vanessa to Claire, sensing the boundary that had just been crossed. Claire's gaze drifted toward the empty chair that had once belonged to her. Mother Margaret. 11 years had passed, yet some absences never learned how to become ordinary. Her mother had understood the uniform before Claire ever wore it. She had understood that service could take someone away without teaching them to love home any less. Vanessa knew none of that. Or perhaps she had never wanted to. "Well?" Vanessa asked. "You have nothing to say?" Claire looked back at her. Then she smiled. It was not surrender. It was not embarrassment. It was the small, restrained smile of someone who had learned not to spend truth before the room was ready to hear it. Vanessa mistook it for weakness. "That is what I thought," she said. The doorbell had not rung yet. The other dinner guests were due within 20 minutes, including a retired general Vanessa had spent 3 weeks trying to impress. She knew him only as Richard's distinguished new acquaintance, General Nathaniel Brooks. Claire knew him differently. 7 years earlier, in a room filled with senior officers at Fort Belvoir, Nathaniel Brooks had watched a younger Captain Claire Donovan make one decision that changed the course of an entire operation. And tonight, Vanessa had unknowingly placed them at the same table. Claire let the silence remain exactly where Vanessa had placed it. She had learned long ago that rushing to defend yourself often gave other people control of the conversation, and Vanessa had already said enough to expose what she believed. Richard reached for his water glass, then set it down without drinking. Emily kept her eyes on Claire, waiting for anger that never came. "You really do not care, do you?" Vanessa asked. Claire tilted her head slightly. "About what?" "About how this looks." Vanessa gestured toward the uniform. "Your father invites people into his home for one important evening, and you arrive looking as though you might leave the moment someone calls." Claire glanced at the clock. 7:20. "If someone calls and I am required to leave, then I will leave." Vanessa gave a humorless laugh. "Exactly my point." Richard exhaled slowly. "She has responsibilities. So does everyone else." Vanessa adjusted the napkin beside her plate. "But most people do. Not make responsibility their entire identity." Claire could have answered that. She could have explained that Vanessa had never seen her on ordinary mornings, standing in line for coffee, complaining about traffic, forgetting to buy milk, or calling her father from a grocery store because she could not remember which brand of mustard he liked. The uniform was part of her life. It had never been all of it. But Claire knew Vanessa was not asking to understand. She was asking to win. When your mother was alive, Vanessa continued, your father had a real family routine. Holidays meant something. Sundays meant something. Then you joined the army, and suddenly every plan depended on whether Claire could make it. Richard's expression hardened. Do not bring Margaret into this. Claire's eyes shifted toward him. Vanessa leaned back. I am not criticizing Margaret. I am saying she encouraged this. The word this carried more contempt than Vanessa seemed to realize. Claire felt an old memory stir, her mother standing beside a parked car on a cold morning, pressing a scratched brass compass into Claire's hand before she left for training. Margaret had not cried until Claire was already 20 yards away. Claire had known because she turned back. She encouraged me to choose a life I could respect, Claire said. Vanessa paused. It was the first answer that seemed to reach her. Then the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the dining room. Vanessa immediately stood, smoothing the front of her dress. Her entire expression changed before she reached the foyer. Warmth appeared. Social grace returned. That will be the Harrisons, she said. Over the next 15 minutes, the house filled with damp coats, polite laughter, and the smell of rain carried in from outside. Claire moved toward the living room while Richard greeted guests. Major Thomas Harrison, retired from the Army several years earlier, noticed Claire's uniform almost immediately. Major Donovan, he said, offering his hand. Fort Belvoir. Yes, sir. What do you do there? Before Claire could answer, Vanessa appeared beside them. Claire's work is terribly complicated, she said with a light laugh. We try not to let military business take over family evenings. Harrison looked at Claire, then at Vanessa. I was only asking where she serves. And now you know. Vanessa smiled and moved away to greet another guest. Harrison watched her leave. Interesting evening, he asked quietly. Claire almost smiled. It is still early. At 7:43, headlights swept across the front windows. Vanessa stopped in the middle of a sentence. A dark sedan rolled slowly around the circular driveway and came to rest beneath the porch light. Richard glanced outside. That should be Nathaniel. Vanessa straightened immediately. Claire remained perfectly still. Through the rain-speckled glass, she saw a tall, silver-haired man step from the car and button his coat against the cold. Emily noticed Claire's expression change. It was only for a second, but it was enough. You know him, she whispered. Claire watched retired General Nathaniel Brooks approach the front door. Yes, she said. I do. The front door opened before Vanessa could reach it, and Richard welcomed Nathaniel Brooks inside with the easy familiarity of two men who had shared coffee often enough to stop pretending every conversation required an occasion. Nathaniel was 71, tall and lean, with silver hair, a weathered face, and the straight posture of someone whose body still remembered decades of military habit. He removed his dark overcoat and handed it to Richard. Terrible weather for August, he said. Virginia likes surprises. Richard smiled. You have not met my wife properly. Vanessa, this is Nathaniel Brooks. Vanessa stepped forward with immediate warmth. General Brooks, we are honored to have you. Nathaniel is fine these days. I could never call a general by his first name. Nathaniel smiled politely. Retirement has been trying to convince me otherwise. The guests laughed, and Vanessa relaxed. This was the version of the evening she understood. Polished conversation, important people, careful introductions. She guided Nathaniel toward the living room, explaining who was present and mentioning the dinner she had arranged as though every detail carried significance. Claire remained near the fireplace beside Emily, half concealed by a small group of guests. Nathaniel had not seen her yet. You really know him? Emily whispered. I worked under him years ago. Worked under him how? Claire looked at her cousin. In the army. Emily gave her an impatient look. I figured that part out. Claire almost laughed. Across the room, Vanessa was telling Nathaniel about Richard's involvement with a local veterans organization when Major Thomas Harrison stepped aside to make room near the fireplace. Nathaniel's gaze moved through the opening. He saw the uniform first, then the face above it. He stopped. The smile disappeared from his expression, not from displeasure but recognition. Claire straightened almost instinctively. 7 years vanished in the space between them. For an instant she was no longer standing in her father's home. She remembered fluorescent lights before sunrise, stale coffee, maps covering a conference table, and Nathaniel Brooks watching a room full of senior officers argue themselves into circles. "Major Donovan," he said. Vanessa turned. Claire stepped forward. "General Brooks." Nathaniel crossed the room and offered his hand. "It has been too long." "Yes, sir." His handshake was brief, formal, and unmistakably respectful. Nathaniel looked at the insignia on her uniform and nodded once. "Major, I heard about the promotion, but I never had the chance to congratulate you." "Thank you, sir." Richard looked at Claire. "Promotion?" Claire glanced toward him. "Last year." Richard's eyebrows rose. "You never told me." "I did, Dad." He searched his memory and found nothing. Claire spared him the embarrassment of explaining that she had mentioned it during a phone call he ended early because guests had arrived. Vanessa stepped closer. "So you two have met?" Nathaniel looked at her. "More than met." Something in his tone quieted the nearest conversations. "Captain Donovan worked on my staff 7 years ago during one of the most difficult planning cycles I ever commanded." Vanessa glanced at Claire, then back at Nathaniel. "Captain." She was a captain then. Nathaniel's eyes returned to Claire. "And usually the youngest officer at the table." Emily smiled. "Was she good?" Claire gave her cousin a warning look, but Nathaniel answered before she could stop him. "Good officers solve the problem they are given." He paused. Claire had an irritating habit of finding the problem nobody else realized they had. A few people laughed. Claire lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with the attention. Vanessa did not laugh. "Well," she said, "Claire has always been very serious about her career." Nathaniel studied her for half a second. "No," he said quietly. "She was serious about the people depending on her." The distinction settled over the room. Then Richard announced dinner, breaking the silence. Guests began moving toward the dining room. Vanessa turned away first. She had wanted General Brooks at her table because his presence made the evening feel important. What she had not expected was that before he had even taken his seat, he had made Claire the person everyone wanted to understand. Dinner began with the kind of careful conversation people used when everyone sensed something important had happened, but nobody knew whether they were allowed to mention it. Vanessa had arranged the seating herself. Nathaniel sat near Richard at the center of the long table, while Claire remained several chairs away beside Emily. Whether Vanessa had planned the distance before Nathaniel arrived or simply refused to change it afterward, Claire could not tell. She did not care enough to ask. For the first 10 minutes, conversations stayed safely on local subjects. Property taxes. A new veterans center planned outside Alexandria. College football. The restoration of an old courthouse. Vanessa moved gracefully between topics, refilling glasses and directing questions toward Nathaniel whenever attention drifted elsewhere. Claire ate quietly. Then Major Harrison looked down the table. "So, Major Donovan, 14 years?" Claire nodded. "Just over 14. Richard turned toward her. "Has it really been that long?" "It has. Your mother was still alive when you joined." The sentence softened his voice. Claire looked at him. "She drove me to the airport." Richard smiled faintly. "She cried all the way home." "I know. How would you?" "No, because she called me before I boarded and denied crying for 20 minutes. Richard laughed, and for the first time that evening Claire heard something familiar in it. Vanessa placed her fork down. Margaret always encouraged Claire's independence. Claire heard the edge immediately. Richard did too. "She encouraged both of us," he said. Vanessa smiled. "Of course. I only mean that military life was easier for Margaret to romanticize before she understood what it would cost." Claire's hand became still beside her plate. Nathaniel looked up. "Cost?" Vanessa nodded as though the question were innocent. "Missed holidays. Canceled visits. Years of a daughter living according to somebody else's schedule." Richard would never complain, but I watched him wait for phone calls that came days late. Claire looked toward her father. Richard stared at Vanessa. "That is not the whole story." "No," Claire said quietly. "It is not." Vanessa turned toward her. Then tell us the whole story. Claire considered the invitation and recognized it for what it was. Not curiosity. A challenge. There is no whole story that fits into dinner conversation. Convenient. Emily lowered her fork. Vanessa. What? Everyone is treating Claire like I insulted the army itself. I am talking about family. Claire felt the familiar weight of the room shifting toward confrontation. Years of military service had taught her that not every provocation deserved an immediate response. Sometimes the person pushing hardest was standing closest to the truth they were trying not to see. Vanessa glanced toward Claire's uniform. Your mother gave you that old compass before you left, did she not? Claire's eyes sharpened. Richard looked surprised. You still have it? Claire hesitated, then nodded toward the small travel bag resting beside the sideboard. It is in there. Emily smiled. Grandpa's brass compass? The same one. Vanessa gave a small sigh. Margaret turned that thing into a symbol. Find your direction. Follow your purpose. I remember hearing about it. Claire's voice cooled. She believed symbols mattered when people remembered what they stood for. Vanessa seemed not to notice. Or perhaps they make ordinary choices feel more important than they are. The table went silent. Richard's face hardened. Emily stared at Vanessa in disbelief. Claire did not move. Then Nathaniel slowly set down his water glass. His eyes were fixed on the travel bag. The brass compass, he said. Claire turned toward him. Something had changed in his expression. Scratched glass? Small dent along the bottom edge. Claire's breathing slowed. Yes. Nathaniel leaned back, memory settling over his face. Your mother gave it to you before your first assignment. Claire stared at him. Richard looked from Nathaniel to his daughter. Vanessa's confidence faltered for the first time that evening. Claire had never told Nathaniel her mother's name. More importantly, she had never told him where that compass came from. Claire kept her eyes on Nathaniel. How do you know that? She asked. Nathaniel seemed surprised by the question. Then understanding crossed his face. You do not remember telling me. Claire searched 7 years of memory and found nothing. I remember the compass. I do not remember telling you about my mother. Nathaniel nodded slowly. You did not tell me directly. Around the table, forks remained still. Vanessa looked annoyed by the attention the small brass object had suddenly received, but Richard leaned forward as though a door to an old room had just opened. Nathaniel rested his hands beside his plate. It was February. Just before 6 in the morning. We had been working nearly 18 hours. Claire remembered. The memory returned first through sound, ventilation humming above fluorescent lights, coffee pouring into paper cups, tired voices becoming sharper as patience disappeared. She had been Captain Claire Donovan then, assigned to a planning group at Fort Belvoir during a large emergency readiness exercise involving military commands and civilian agencies across the national capital region. The exercise itself was controlled and carefully supervised, but the planning problem had become painfully real. 3 teams were working from different assumptions. 2 senior departments wanted priority access to the same transportation resources. A civilian agency had changed its requirements overnight. By dawn, the schedule that had taken weeks to build was beginning to collapse under its own complexity. Claire had been the youngest officer at the central table. Colonels spoke first. Directors spoke longer. Every person had expertise. Every person also had something they did not want to surrender. Claire listened. At 5:52, Nathaniel had stepped outside the conference room and found her standing near a window, turning a scratched brass compass between her fingers. Planning to navigate your way out of here, Captain? He had asked. Claire had smiled. Considering it, sir. Nathaniel pointed toward the compass. Family piece? My grandfather's. Claire had looked down at it. My mother gave it to me before my first assignment. That was all she had said about Margaret. But Nathaniel remembered the next sentence perfectly. She told me a compass does not choose your road. It only reminds you where north is. Back at the dinner table, Richard closed his eyes briefly. That sounds exactly like Margaret. Claire looked at him, then toward Nathaniel. You remembered that for 7 years? I remembered what happened 10 minutes later. Nathaniel's voice changed, carrying them deeper into the morning. Claire had returned to the conference room while another argument gathered momentum around the table. Instead of joining it, she walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 questions. Who needed help first? What resources were actually available? Which decision could not wait until noon? The room had quieted. She asked each department to answer only those questions. Titles disappeared from the discussion. Positions became less important than priorities. Within 40 minutes, the planning team had rebuilt the schedule around what mattered instead of who had argued longest. No one was embarrassed. No one was publicly blamed. By midday, the exercise was back on track. Claire looked down at her plate. There were 20 people in that room. Everyone contributed. Nathaniel smiled faintly. That is what you said afterward. Vanessa shifted in her chair. It sounds like Claire was simply doing her job. Nathaniel turned toward her. Yes. Vanessa seemed relieved until he continued. That is precisely why I remembered her. He looked back at Claire. People tend to remember dramatic leadership. They should pay more attention to the kind that prevents drama from becoming necessary. The rain whispered against the windows. Richard stared at his daughter with a mixture of pride and regret. Nathaniel lifted his glass, but did not drink. That morning changed the way I evaluated officers, he said. And years later, when someone asked me to name the first person I trusted for a very particular assignment, I did not have to think twice. Nathaniel's last sentence changed the temperature of the table. Claire did not move, but her attention sharpened. What assignment? She asked. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment, as though deciding how much he could say in a room full of people. A strategic coordination position in the National Capital Region. The selection process began several months ago. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew of several positions that description might fit, but none she had discussed with him. You recommended me? I did. Richard leaned forward. For what kind of work? Nathaniel answered carefully. The kind where rank alone cannot solve the problem. Military commands, federal agencies, civilian partners, competing priorities. They need someone who can walk into a room where everyone believes their concern comes first and still get them moving in the same direction. Major Harrison nodded slowly. That is not a small assignment. No, Nathaniel said. It is not. Vanessa looked from Nathaniel to Claire. The polite smile she had worn earlier returned, but now it seemed strained. Surely there are colonels with more experience. Claire glanced toward her stepmother, but said nothing. Nathaniel did not appear offended. There are many excellent colonels. Then I would assume seniority matters. It does. Nathaniel folded his napkin beside his plate. Until it becomes the only thing someone brings into the room. Vanessa blinked. Nathaniel continued before she could respond. The position requires judgment, restraint, and the ability to hear what people are not saying. Those qualities do not automatically arrive with another insignia. Claire lowered her gaze briefly. Praise had always made her more uncomfortable than criticism. Criticism gave her something to evaluate. Praise made her feel as though she had been placed beneath a spotlight without permission. Richard noticed. Why did you never tell me you were being considered? Claire looked at him. Because I did not know I was. Nathaniel nodded. The recommendation process was confidential. Richard sat back, absorbing that. Vanessa reached for her water. Well, this certainly explains why the army keeps demanding so much of Claire's time. There it was again. Not admiration. Not curiosity. A way to turn recognition into evidence for the same accusation. Claire finally looked directly at her. The army does not demand my life, Vanessa. Does it not? No. I chose to serve. And everyone around you lives with that choice. Richard closed his eyes for a second. Emily whispered Vanessa's name, but Claire raised one hand slightly. She did not need protection. You are right about one thing, Claire said. My choices affected this family. I missed Christmas twice. I missed Dad's retirement dinner. I called late. Sometimes I did not call at all. Vanessa's expression softened with the confidence of someone hearing her argument confirmed. Then Claire continued. But you decided those absences meant I cared less. You never asked whether missing them hurt me too. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Claire's voice remained level. You decided my uniform represented distance. To me, It represents promises I made and responsibilities I accepted. You do not have to understand those choices. You do not even have to admire them. The room had become completely still. But you do not get to use them as proof that I love my family less. Richard looked down at his hands. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Nathaniel watched Claire without intervening. That mattered to her. He had defended her professional judgment, but this was not his argument to finish. After several seconds, Richard spoke. Claire, I should have asked you that years ago. She turned toward him. Asked me what? His voice was quieter now. What it cost you to miss us? Claire's expression softened. Before she could answer, Nathaniel reached inside his jacket. He removed a cream-colored envelope and placed it beside his plate. Claire recognized the embossed seal immediately, though she had never seen an envelope like it addressed to her. Nathaniel rested one hand over it. There is something else, he said. And Richard, this is why I knew Claire would be here tonight. You told me last week your daughter was coming home for dinner. I asked the foundation to let me bring this personally. Claire stared at the cream-colored envelope, and for the first time that evening, Vanessa was not the person controlling the silence. The embossed seal belonged to the National Military Leadership Foundation, an organization Claire knew mostly through professional conferences and scholarship programs. Her name was written across the front in dark blue ink. Major Claire Donovan. Nathaniel slid the envelope toward her. 3 months ago, the foundation opened nominations for its Distinguished Service Leadership Award, he said. It recognizes sustained leadership, mentorship, and public service carried out without expectation of recognition. Claire looked at him. You nominated me. I submitted the primary recommendation. Nathaniel paused. I was not the only one. Emily leaned forward. Richard did not move at all. Nathaniel continued. 2 former commanders submitted supporting letters. A civilian emergency coordinator wrote another. So did an officer you mentored 8 years ago. Claire's expression changed at that. 8 years ago? Nathaniel smiled. A lieutenant at the time. Apparently, she remembers a conversation outside your office better than you do. Claire searched her memory. Too many young officers. Too many late afternoons. Too many conversations that had seemed ordinary at the time. I do not know what to say. That might be a first, Nathaniel said, and Major Harrison laughed softly. Claire gave him a look that carried 7 years of familiar professional disagreement. Nathaniel raised both hands in surrender. The board completed its review last week. They selected you. Claire's fingers remained on the edge of the envelope without opening it. Richard looked at his daughter as though the room had shifted several feet around him. You did not know? No. None of this. No, Dad. Nathaniel nodded. That was intentional. The foundation wanted the notification delivered before the public announcement. Richard's eyes dropped toward Claire's ribbon rack, then toward the envelope. How much of your life have I missed? The question was so quiet that Claire almost wished she had not heard it. Vanessa shifted beside him. Richard, do not do this to yourself. He did not look at her. I am asking my daughter. Claire took a breath. You did not miss my life. I did not know you were promoted until tonight. I told you. Richard winced. I know. I remember now. You called while we had people over. Claire said nothing. He looked toward the table. And I rushed you off the phone. Dad. No. Let me finish. His voice remained controlled, but something beneath it had changed. I spent years telling myself you were too busy for us. Maybe sometimes you were. But I never asked whether I had made it easy for you to come home. Claire felt the words settle somewhere deeper than Vanessa's insults ever could. Emily looked away, giving them the privacy a crowded table could not provide. Vanessa reached for Richard's hand. We both tried. Richard finally looked at her. Did we? Vanessa withdrew her hand. Nathaniel remained silent. This was no longer a military story he could explain for Claire. Richard turned back to his daughter. I am proud of you. Claire swallowed. Thank you. Not because of that envelope. His eyes stayed on hers. I need you to know that. Vanessa's face tightened. Nobody has ever said they were not proud of Claire. Claire looked at her stepmother. You told me tonight that I stopped belonging here. Vanessa opened her mouth. No answer came. Claire placed the unopened envelope beside her plate. An award cannot fix that sentence. The room went completely still. And it should not have to. Vanessa looked at the unopened envelope as though it had become an unwanted guest at her table. I think this has all been misunderstood, she said at last. Claire did not look away. Which part? Vanessa hesitated. What I said earlier. I was talking about priorities, not your worth. You said I stopped belonging here. Richard's jaw tightened. Emily lowered her eyes. Vanessa drew a slow breath. Because this family has spent years adjusting to your schedule. Your father worried about you. Holidays changed. Plans changed. I watched him pretend it did not bother him. Claire nodded once. Some of that is true. Vanessa seemed surprised. Then you understand. I understand that my service affected people I love. That is different from accepting what you said. Nathaniel remained silent. Claire was grateful for it. He had already given the room every credential it needed to admire her. What happened next had nothing to do with credentials. Claire placed one hand over the cream envelope. Suppose this was not here. Vanessa glanced at it. What? Suppose General Brooks had never walked through that door. Suppose nobody had recommended me for anything. Suppose I had spent 14 years doing ordinary work that nobody outside the army would ever hear about. Claire's voice remained steady. Would I deserve less respect at this table? Vanessa's lips parted, but Claire continued. That is the problem. Everyone became more comfortable with my uniform the moment someone important explained that I had done something impressive while wearing it. Major Harrison looked down thoughtfully. Richard's eyes remained fixed on his daughter. Respect should not require a resume, Claire said. I should not need a general, an award, or a promotion to prove that I belong in my father's home. The grandfather clock sounded from the hallway, each note moving through the dining room with slow weight. Vanessa stared at Claire. I never said you were a bad person. No. You said there was no place for the person I became. Richard pushed his chair back. The legs moved softly across the hardwood floor. Vanessa turned toward him. Richard? He stood beside the table, looking older than he had at the beginning of dinner, but somehow steadier. Claire. She looked up. Your mother and I did not always understand why you chose the army. Claire blinked. That admission surprised her. She worried constantly, Richard continued. So did I. But Margaret never confused worry with rejection. His eyes shifted toward Vanessa. And neither should I have. Vanessa's face tightened. You are making me sound cruel. I am telling my daughter what I should have told her a long time ago. Richard walked around the table until he stood beside Claire. He rested a hand gently on her shoulder. This is your home. Uniform or no uniform. Award or no award. Assignment or no assignment. You do not have to earn your chair here. Claire looked down for a second. The words reached a place 14 years of professional recognition never had. When she raised her eyes again, they were bright but controlled. Thank you, Dad. Across the table, Emily quietly smiled. Nathaniel lowered his gaze, allowing father and daughter their moment. Vanessa remained seated. Her carefully planned dinner, her distinguished guest, her perfect table, all of it suddenly seemed irrelevant beside one simple truth she could no longer redirect. Claire had not defeated her. Claire had refused to fight her on those terms at all. Nathaniel finally lifted his water glass. To service without spectacle, he said. Major Harrison raised his glass. Emily followed. Richard did the same. Claire hesitated, then lifted hers. One by one, the remaining guests joined them. Vanessa was last. Her fingers closed around the stem of her glass, but she did not immediately raise it. Then her eyes met Claire's. There was no triumph waiting for her there. No mockery. No demand for surrender. Only the same patient dignity Vanessa had mistaken for weakness hours earlier. Slowly, Vanessa raised her glass. Dinner continued, but something fundamental had changed. And when the last guest eventually left, Vanessa knew there was still one conversation she could no longer avoid. By 9:30, the rain had stopped, leaving the windows dark and shining beneath the porch lights. The guests departed slowly, carrying coats, umbrellas, and the subdued feeling that they had witnessed something far more personal than the dinner Vanessa had planned. Major Harrison shook Claire's hand before leaving. Congratulations, Major. Claire glanced at the unopened envelope, still resting near her plate. Thank you, sir. Nathaniel was the last guest to reach the door. Richard helped him with his coat while Claire stood nearby. Open that envelope eventually, Nathaniel said. Claire smiled. I was planning to. You have been planning things for 14 years. Try celebrating one. I will consider it. Nathaniel laughed softly, then his expression grew serious. For what it is worth, you handled tonight exactly the way I remembered you. Claire looked toward the dining room. I am not sure that was leadership. Neither were you 7 years ago. Nathaniel opened the door. Cool Virginia air entered the foyer. That was the point. He shook Richard's hand and stepped outside. Claire watched his sedan disappear beyond the trees before closing the door. When she returned to the dining room, Emily had gone upstairs, and Richard was carrying dishes toward the kitchen. Vanessa stood alone beside the table. The chandelier had been dimmed. Without the guests, polished conversation, and carefully arranged place settings, she suddenly looked tired. Claire. Claire stopped. Vanessa folded her hands in front of her. I owe you an apology. Claire waited. Vanessa glanced toward the empty chair where Claire had been sitting. I told myself I was defending your father. Every holiday you missed became evidence. Every shortened phone call became evidence. Eventually I stopped asking whether I was being fair. Claire said nothing. Vanessa looked at her uniform. I treated that uniform as though it were the thing that took you away from this family. It did take me away sometimes. Yes. Vanessa nodded. But I made that mean you did not want to come back. Claire's expression softened slightly. Those are different things. I understand that now. Vanessa swallowed. What I said tonight was cruel. I am sorry. Claire studied her for a long moment. An apology could acknowledge damage. It could not erase years of assumptions in 30 seconds. Thank you for saying it, she replied. Vanessa nodded. Claire did not offer instant forgiveness, and Vanessa did not ask for it. For tonight, honesty was enough. Richard entered carrying the scratched brass compass. Found this beside your bag. Claire took it from him. The metal was cool in her palm. Your mother would have enjoyed tonight, Richard said. Claire smiled faintly. She would have hated the fancy china. Richard laughed. She absolutely would have. Then his expression softened. I meant what I said. You never have to earn your way back into this house. Claire closed her fingers around the compass. I know. The next morning arrived clear and bright. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor while Claire came downstairs with her travel bag over one shoulder. Richard was already awake. A mug of black coffee waited on the counter beside the cream envelope. No sugar, he said. Claire looked at him. You remembered. I am trying. She opened the envelope at last, read the formal notification quietly, then folded it and placed it inside her bag. The recognition mattered. The new assignment might matter even more. But neither felt as important as the coffee waiting beside her father. Before leaving, Claire placed the old compass in her palm. The needle trembled beneath the scratched glass, wandered for a second, then settled north. Her mother had been right. A compass could never choose the road. It could only remind you where you stood. Claire slipped it into her pocket, hugged her father, and stepped into the Virginia morning knowing something 14 years of service had never taught her. Belonging was not a reward handed down by rank, approval, or recognition. Sometimes home simply needed time to remember who had always belonged there.